Deep within the secluded confines of the Vatican, where even the faintest glimmer of light seems hesitant to penetrate, lies a chamber identified only by the cryptic symbol number 114. Within this anonymous space, nestled within a dust-laden oak box untouched for centuries, rests an enigmatic scroll. This peculiar artifact is secured by two distinct red wax seals, one bearing the insignia of the Knights Templar, and the other, the emblem of the Order of Assassins. The sheer improbability of two sworn adversaries endorsing the same document immediately raises profound questions. Why has the Vatican meticulously guarded this scroll, yet perpetually withheld its contents from the world? Furthermore, what became of the last individual who dared to attempt deciphering its secrets, vanishing without a trace? Conventional history has long presented the Templars as valiant holy warriors, whilst the assassins were depicted as elusive, fear-inducing killers. However, what if these two factions were merely opposing facets of a singular, intricate game? What if, contrary to popular belief, they once converged at the same negotiating table, not to engage in combat, but to engage in discourse with the Pope himself? History, as we know it, is replete with profound voids, spaces that no one has ever dared to illuminate. The narrative you are about to encounter transcends the confines of any published textbook. It represents a segment of truth that unseen forces have diligently labored for a millennium to conceal from your awareness. The Templar ascent. From pious vows to financial dominion, there exists an often overlooked aspect of the Knights Templar. Their genesis was not rooted in power, but in unwavering faith, or at least, what was perceived as faith. In the year 1119, amidst the lingering devastation of the First Crusade, 9 French knights convened in Jerusalem. Their singular, noble objective was to safeguard pilgrims journeying to the Holy Land. They embraced vows of poverty, resided within a monastic setting, and practiced austere dietary habits. They christened themselves the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, drawing their name from their lodging upon the ancient foundations of King Solomon's temple. Initially, they presented more as armed monks than formidable warriors, yet this perception swiftly began to transform. As pilgrims entrusted their safety to them, so too did monarchs. What commenced as straightforward escort services rapidly evolved into something far more expansive. The Templars assumed the responsibility of safeguarding pilgrims' valuable possessions. Before long, their influence swelled, and they controlled immense treasures, vast tracts of land, and an intricate money transfer network that spanned from England to Jerusalem. This marked the emergence of a medieval financial system, remarkably managed by sword-bearing monks. The Templars transitioned from a mere military order into European history's inaugural true bank. With the accumulation of such immense wealth, a subtle yet significant shift in their allegiances became discernible. Although formally sworn to the Pope's authority, the Templars acknowledged no earthly king, while monarchs frequently sought loans to finance their incessant wars. The Templars commanded sufficient wealth to raise and maintain their own formidable armies. Operating from the shadows, they erected colossal stone fortresses, where they meticulously concealed invaluable documents, intricate maps, and sacred relics. The precise nature of what they guarded remained shrouded in mystery. It was known only that anything placed beneath their distinctive red cross was rendered untouchable, even by the King of France himself. Even more astonishingly, this unprecedented rise unfolded directly under the vigilant gaze of the Church. Yet, the Vatican found itself powerless to curb their burgeoning influence because the Templars were not merely Christ's warriors. They were, in essence, the clandestine financiers orchestrating the Crusades. A subtle, undeclared alliance had thus materialized between spiritual authority and potent military might. However, as is often the case with unchecked power, their ambition began to overreach. Whispers began to circulate, tales of Templar leaders engaging in rituals utterly alien to biblical teachings, rites older than Christianity itself. It was rumored that the candles within their impregnable fortresses did not burn for devout prayer, but rather to invoke something that existed beyond the realm of conventional faith. And just as the Templars appeared utterly unassailable, the nascent stirrings of another formidable force began to emerge. This new power did not originate from the west, but from the shadowed mountains of the Middle East, a clandestine order devoid of treasure or fortresses, armed with nothing but daggers and shrouded in darkness, the Assassins. This was not their initial encounter. Rather, it was the opening gambit in a historical drama that dared not be fully recorded. The Assassins' Genesis. Faith as a path to liberation. While the Templars ascended with the formidable backing of both kings and the Vatican, the Assassins emerged from a crucible of exile. Their origins lay within a branch of faith condemned as heresy, concealed deep within remote mountains where sunlight barely pierced. Their journey did not commence with bloodshed, but with a profound ideological conviction that faith should never serve as a mere instrument of power, but rather as a liberating conduit from its grasp. In the 11th century, the Islamic world was experiencing significant fragmentation. Within the vast Shia Muslim community, a smaller, distinct offshoot known as the Ismailis was branded as heretical by the prevailing Sunni rulers. Forced into the shadows, the Ismailis established secretive communities nestled within isolated, mountainous regions, far beyond the reach of any conventional army. In one such impregnable fortress, deep within the Alborz mountains of Persia, a pivotal figure emerged. His name was Hassan I-Sabah, a prodigious scholar, a brilliant strategist, and according to numerous clandestine records, the progenitor of the world's first true order of assassins. Hassan possessed no army, no vast wealth, yet he commanded something no king could ever acquire: absolute, unwavering loyalty. He meticulously recruited young men, subjecting them to rigorous training in writing, philosophy, the art of disguise, languages, combat, and above all, instilling in them the profound conviction that sacrificing one's life for a noble mission represented the zenith of honor. From these meticulous preparations, an unofficial order gradually materialized. They possessed no formal designation, but their terrified adversaries whispered a single name in the darkness: Hashishin, the Assassins. They did not engage in conventional warfare with vast regiments of soldiers. Instead, they employed small, poisoned blades concealed within their sleeves. Their targets were never armies, but exclusively their commanders. There was no necessity to slaughter thousands. A single, precise strike at the opportune moment, in the correct location, could cause an entire military campaign to unravel like a series of falling dominoes. History chronicles their infamous assassinations, ranging from powerful Seljuk generals to influential Western Crusader lords. The assassins made no distinction based on religious affiliation. If you dared to disrupt the delicate balance of power, you invariably became their next target. And they invariably left a chilling premonition, a dagger subtly placed beneath a pillow, or an ominous note intricately carved with arcane symbols. They did not need to commit mass murder to instill terror. The true dread lay in the agonizing uncertainty of not knowing who would be next. Even reigning kings and esteemed bishops found their sleep disturbed by this pervasive fear. The Vatican became aware of their existence relatively early, and despite publicly denouncing them as heretics, secret letters unearthed centuries later revealed a startling truth: some cardinals had, at various times, clandestinely enlisted their services for tasks that even the Pope himself could not overtly undertake. A silent convergence, the Templars and Assassins. Then, as the formidable Templar fortresses began to extend their reach into the Middle East, a profound irony unfolded. The Assassins and the Templars, seemingly destined for perpetual conflict, instead converged. Their collision was not one of war, but of a shared glance, a silent, unspoken understanding that neither faction truly belonged to the tumultuous world outside their clandestine operations. One order thrived on faith bolstered by state power, while the other persevered on a faith the state relentlessly sought to obliterate. Yet both, in their own distinct ways, masterfully manipulated the course of history. A compelling tale, interred within an ancient Latin manuscript, recounts that on a moonlit night in 1173, a Templar knight was led to the formidable fortress of Masyaf, the impenetrable stronghold of the assassins. The nature of their discussion remains unknown, but it is recorded that following that momentous night, a wave of assassinations sweeping across Europe abruptly ceased. Some scholars refer to this as the inaugural, silent pact between the two orders. It was a truce that has never been officially corroborated, yet, paradoxically, cannot be conclusively denied. And so, these two entities, once universally believed to be implacable enemies, began a quiet, clandestine coexistence in the shadows, all under the ever-watchful eye of the Vatican. A peculiar coincidence has long perplexed historians. Numerous Templar strongholds were strategically constructed merely a few days' journey from critical assassin bases, sometimes separated by nothing more than a single mountain range. In an epoch where every opposing faction clashed in a tempest of blood and fire, such an enduring, peaceful coexistence could scarcely be attributed to mere serendipity. Consider Chastelet-Blanc, a Templar fortress situated near Latakia. It stood just a few watch hours, accessible through a mountain pass, from Khalat Alkaf, a secondary contact point for the assassins, a proximity far too convenient to be dismissed as chance. As early as the 12th century, Western records began to document something remarkably peculiar. There were no major battles recorded between the two orders, no systematic purges, no declarations of war, and notably, no official bloodshed. But why? Two distinct organizations, two disparate faiths, two ostensibly opposing ideologies, yet no discernible attempt to utterly annihilate one another. Only one plausible explanation emerges: they met, and they forged an agreement. Yet no trace of this monumental understanding is to be found within any official church document. All records hinting at a potential nexus between the Templars and the assassins have inexplicably vanished from the Vatican archives. The diaries, the letters, the dispatches that, by papal decree, should have been meticulously preserved, now survive only as scattered fragments, buried deep within lost private collections. However, in 1947, during an archaeological excavation in the ancient city of Byblos, researchers made a remarkable discovery: a fragment of goatskin parchment, revealing itself to be a map. On this map, the military insignias of both the Templars and the assassins were depicted overlapping in the Bekaa Valley. There was no accompanying explanation, no annotations, just a single point. As if two powerful currents had seamlessly merged into a single underground river. Then, there was the handwritten Latin scroll, unearthed from its clandestine hiding place within a monastery wine cellar in France. It referenced an unnamed rendezvous between the bearer of the cross and the keeper of the blade, in 1171, somewhere amidst the desert near Palmyra. Much of the text had faded with time, leaving only one poignant line legible. We did not find difference. We found purpose. Some scholars readily dismissed this as mere legend. But if that were truly the case, why, in 1226, did the Vatican issue a stringent decree explicitly forbidding the copying or storage of any document bearing the seals of both orders? The coincidences continued to accumulate: lost records, buried alliances, and one irrefutable truth that became impossible to disregard. While the world was consumed by the conflagration and chaos of the Crusades, between the Templars and the assassins, there reigned only a profound silence. A silence that was not born of forgetfulness, but of deliberate design. It was once famously said that there is no peace without an agreement. Therefore, the pressing question is no longer whether they ever met, but rather, when did they meet, and what precisely did they achieve together? The most terrifying truths in the annals of history are not those that were never inscribed, but those that were meticulously recorded and then forcibly erased from existence. A covert collaboration. The Vatican's shadow play. Throughout the 12th and 13th centuries, as the tumultuous Crusades relentlessly shook both the Middle East and Europe, a peculiar phenomenon began to emerge. Certain high-profile assassinations, ostensibly attributed to the assassins, suspiciously coincided with specific political junctures that directly served the strategic interests of the Roman Church. These included the mysterious deaths of Western lords who openly defied the Vatican, independent-minded reformist priests, and even influential Muslim leaders who obstructed papal negotiations. All were eliminated swiftly, cleanly, and with no party ever claiming responsibility. Centuries later, scattered remnants of evidence began to resurface. Not within the grand, meticulously preserved halls of the Vatican Library, but in modest monasteries dispersed across Switzerland, Persia, and Armenia. Secret copies of documents that should have been irrevocably incinerated somehow miraculously survived. Among these, one particularly stood out, a faded 14th-century manuscript, penned in a curious blend of Latin and ancient Persian. The letter bore two distinct seals. One was a paper mark, subtly imperfect, while the other depicted a crescent moon intricately entwined with a twin-bladed insignia, believed to be the distinctive mark of the assassin leaders. The content did not issue a direct command to kill, yet its phrasing was unmistakably suggestive. He who stands between Jerusalem and truth should be guided to the other realm. Silence is the light of faith. Let darkness deliver the defiant to it. Many Western scholars summarily dismissed this document as an elaborate forgery. However, in a rare and telling move, the Vatican itself issued a formal decree in 1743. All existing copies of this letter were to be immediately confiscated, despite the original having been centuries old by that point. If it were genuinely a fabrication, what then was the source of such profound fear? Elsewhere, within the meticulous records of the Maronite order in the mountains of Lebanon, one monk penned a revealing entry. Some envoys of the Holy See crossed the Mediterranean to meet those called heretics, but in truth, they were bearers of the final solution. That solution clearly did not emanate from prayer. It originated from a blade concealed within the shadows, a weapon the Vatican could never openly wield but could discreetly rent. The assassins, long condemned as heretics by Orthodox Church doctrine, had thus become a silent, indispensable tool, provided that their covert arrangement was never exposed. The Vatican never officially acknowledged this clandestine partnership. Yet the selective disappearance of the Pope's adversaries, coupled with the mysterious survival of assassin strongholds deep within Crusader territory, remains unstated, yet compelling evidence. In the pervasive darkness, the letters continued their clandestine journey, not via official messengers, but through unnamed couriers who materialized at night and vanished before the break of dawn. Their names were never committed to any written record, yet their indelible fingerprints are strewn throughout the fabric of history. And perhaps it is precisely because of these enigmatic letters that, even to this day, the Vatican steadfastly refuses to unseal certain ancient vaults, chambers that only 3 individuals in recorded history have ever been permitted to enter. Thus, the question is no longer whether they ever communicated, but rather, what intricate purposes did they serve for one another? This is a chapter of history that remained shrouded in silence for an astonishing 800 years. Indispensable tools. The survival of the Templars and assassins. History has seldom been benevolent to organizations that lacked allegiance to a throne, a dynastic lineage, or a sanctioned faith. So, why then did 2 forces, once universally branded as heretical and profoundly dangerous, the Templars and the assassins, not only survive but thrive for centuries? The answer resides in something simultaneously simple and inherently perilous. They pledged their unwavering loyalty to no one save their own overarching mission. The assassins were the living nightmare of every Orthodox Islamic empire. They launched surgical strikes against rulers, vociferously rejected traditional Sharia law, and constructed their faith not upon rigid dogma, but upon individual, profound reflection. Their ambition was not the acquisition of land. Their aim was directed squarely at the minds that governed it. To them, the timely demise of a single king held greater value than the deployment of 10,000 soldiers. And the Templars? They represented the most formidable threat to Europe's entrenched monarchies. They commanded immense wealth, wielded powerful armies, and possessed impregnable fortresses. Even more perilously, they answered to no king. Officially, they professed obedience to the Pope. However, over time, even this allegiance became largely symbolic. They were the silent financiers behind the Crusades. At one point, the King of France was so deeply indebted to them that he dared not even contemplate touching their assets. And this is precisely why both orders were so reviled. One defiantly rejected the established structures of political rule. The other controlled more land and gold than the combined royal houses of Europe. To both Islamic and Christian empires, they were persistent thorns in the side of entrenched power. Yet, precisely because they belonged to no singular entity, they became immensely useful to everyone. A king in need of funds? They readily provided loans. A pope seeking to silence a rival? They effectively delivered the message. Armies requiring strategic maps? They provided crucial intelligence from their hidden networks. Merchants desiring protection? They offered armed escorts. The Templars and the Assassins were like concealed blades within every empire's sleeve, hated by all, yet discarded by none. Because without their covert interventions, the world's gears would grind to a halt, chaos would reign supreme, and control would irrevocably slip away. Both orders instinctively understood this profound truth, and that is precisely why they endured. Not through overwhelming force, but by becoming utterly indispensable in a world teetering precariously on the brink. There were even instances where kings would publicly denounce them by day, yet secretly dispatch messengers to their fortresses under the cloak of night to handle private affairs. It was a perilous game, and they played it with unparalleled mastery. So, despite the widespread hatred, the damning labels of heresy, and the meticulously rewritten histories designed to cast them in perpetual shadow, the Templars and the Assassins persisted. No grand declarations, no unfurled banners, yet their presence was consistently felt at history's most pivotal junctures. Their survival was never a given, it was something that commanded fear. For everyone understood that he who kills an assassin will be watched for life, and he who betrays the Templars will never borrow another coin for as long as he lives. Unrecorded rendezvous. Acre and Tripoli. Acre, Tripoli, once vibrant centers of trade, fervent faith, and relentless bloodshed. Yet, behind their ancient stone walls, it was not merely the echoes of prayers that resonated. There were also clandestine meetings, meticulously unrecorded in any official chronicle. Conversations held without names, without witnesses, and vehemently denied by all who participated. According to long-banned manuscripts, sometime around 1192, as the Third Crusade neared its conclusion, a peculiar envoy was observed departing the Templar fortress in Acre. They journeyed south, towards the treacherous mountains held by the Assassins. They carried no banners, no official escort, only a small iron box, tightly wrapped in black cloth. The contents remained a mystery to all. However, 2 weeks later, a prominent European nobleman was inexplicably assassinated in Jerusalem. At the time, the Templar leadership vehemently denied any involvement. Yet, those present in Acre swore that the fortress remained lit throughout the entire night, a ritual reserved exclusively for the most critical, highest-level councils. In Tripoli, the narrative deepens. In 1203, as both the Assassins and the Templars confronted escalating threats from nascent Byzantine and Mamluk alliances, whispers circulated of a secret meeting held beneath an abandoned church. The usual gatekeepers were mysteriously replaced by unknown knights, conspicuously wearing no insignia, a highly unusual circumstance, as every Templar was strictly required to bear the cross. That very same night, a group believed to originate from Masyaf's fortress silently slipped out of the city before sunrise. By morning, the entire underground chamber they had occupied was hermetically sealed. No one was permitted entry, not even the local clergy. Official historical accounts remained silent on these occurrences. However, in a handwritten document unearthed in the Library of Alexandria, A Maronite monk penned a telling observation. Two shadows met that night, not to reconcile, not to surrender, but to reset the board for the years to come. No one has ever publicly confirmed these meetings. There exists no treaty, no seals, no formal oaths, only the inexplicable events that transpired afterward, strange deaths, fortresses abruptly abandoned, and maps quietly redrawn. And it is precisely this pervasive ambiguity that instills profound fear. For if two of history's most feared adversaries genuinely converged, not to destroy one another, but to cooperate, then what in this world can ever be deemed truly certain? The Vatican never acknowledged these events. Yet, it discreetly confiscated all materials referencing the enigmatic talks in Acre and Tripoli. Monks who dared to write about the mysterious envoys were either reassigned to distant monasteries or simply vanished from the official records. The truth lies buried beneath layers of dust and time. No one dares to confirm it, yet no one dares to deny it either. And so, these clandestine meetings persist, like faint, almost imperceptible cracks in the ancient stone walls of history. They are faint enough to be ignored, yet clear enough to serve as a stark reminder that something truly transpired, something that no one wishes to speak of. The Mongol storm and an unspoken alliance. For centuries, the Templars and the Assassins were widely perceived as eternal, irreconcilable enemies, separated by unwavering faith, conflicting ideologies, and rivers of spilled blood. It was believed they could never cross paths without leaving a devastating trail of death. And yet, there was one singular moment in history, and only one, when these two seemingly irreconcilable forces stepped back in unison, moving in the same direction. When the thundering hooves of the Mongol Empire began their relentless storm across the sacred lands of Islam, threatening even the formidable Crusader strongholds of the Middle East, a chilling truth emerged. Neither the Templars nor the Assassins possessed the capacity to survive alone. The Mongols were not a dynasty, they were an unstoppable storm. They held no regard for holy lands, sacred texts, or religious disputes. They simply obliterated everything in their path: villages, scriptures, temples, leaving behind only an eerie silence. When Hulagu Khan, the fearsome grandson of Genghis Khan, invaded Persia and Iraq, he mercilessly burned the library of Baghdad, massacred hundreds of thousands of civilians, and plunged the entire Islamic world into unimaginable horror. But what truly sent shivers down Europe's spine was the persistent rumor that Hulagu had no intention of halting his destructive advance there. And so, a strange exchange of letters began. Some were recorded as being dispatched from Templar fortresses in Tortosa to the high mountains of Syria, territory firmly held by the Assassins. The precise contents of these dispatches were never revealed. However, only weeks later, several assassin outposts were abruptly abandoned, their forces redirected eastward, precisely where the Mongols were anticipated to advance. In a document subsequently banned by the Vatican, a handwritten Latin line was discovered. It read, "When the wind blows from the north, the blade and the cross must face it together." No one ever formally declared it an alliance. There was no treaty, no handshake witnessed by the annals of history. Yet, during the brutal siege of Baghdad in 1258, several eyewitnesses claimed to have seen white-cloaked knights, bearing the distinctive cross, fighting shoulder to shoulder with Muslim warriors wielding curved daggers. They exchanged no words, they did not linger after the battle, but they fought side by side, as if they had known each other all along. Perhaps it was because both instinctively understood that the Mongols were not a power to be negotiated with. They were destruction made manifest. And if left unchecked, faith and ambition, gold and philosophy, would all be reduced to mere ash. When Hulagu finally withdrew from the Middle East, summoned back to Mongolia by the death of the great Khan monk, a fragile silence descended once more. The Assassins retreated into their impregnable mountains. The Templars withdrew into the protective confines of their fortresses. No one dared to speak of the days they fought as one. It was as if both sides knew that moment was destined to exist only in the silent memory of stone and bone. No records, no medals, no grand legends. The Vatican, as ever, maintained its impenetrable silence. But soon after, documents concerning the Mongols were quietly removed from the Vatican library, and a monk was discreetly tried for falsifying Eastern historical records. Once again, the truth was deliberately buried. Yet, those who survived the Mongol storm knew one thing with absolute certainty. In that profound darkness, there were handshakes that no one ever dared to witness. The Vatican's guiding hand. The unseen puppeteer. If the Templars were a sword forged in the shape of a cross, and the assassins a concealed dagger cloaked in darkness, then the Vatican was undeniably the hand beneath the robe, subtly guiding them both, leaving no discernible trace. In nearly every significant conflict of the medieval world, the Vatican was undeniably present, yet never on the chaotic battlefield, nor explicitly marked on war maps. Their true power navigated through long, narrow corridors, where a mere whisper possessed the ability to determine the fate of an entire empire. We have long been led to believe that the Vatican despised the assassins, viewing them as heretics, and held the Templars in high esteem, for they ostensibly fought for the faith. But delve deeper, and something disconcertingly strange begins to surface. When the Templars accrued too much power, the Vatican unhesitatingly betrayed them. And when the assassins were relentlessly hunted to the very brink of extinction, the Vatican remained conspicuously silent. Were they truly impartial, belonging to no side? Or were they, in fact, elevated above both factions, a masterful director meticulously pulling the strings from behind a veiled curtain? In secret manuscripts dating from the 13th century, meticulously copied by exiled Jesuit monks, a chilling line appears. The keeper of the temple's key and the bearer of Masyaf's blade both stood before the throne of the supreme bishop. Not on the same day, but with the same intention. Though the Vatican has steadfastly refused to acknowledge this, the recurring alignment between the actions of both groups and the political interests of the Holy See is simply too frequent and too precise to ignore. When a Muslim cleric audaciously defied Vatican envoys and was subsequently assassinated in the dead of night, the assassins were widely blamed, yet no investigation whatsoever ensued. When a European prince sought to reclaim lands held by the Templars, he died suddenly during a pilgrimage. Some records even suggest that the Vatican once deployed dual agents, clergy who held no official title or authority, yet moved discreetly through secret negotiations. They issued no explicit commands, they simply listened, meticulously recorded, and subtly coordinated. The Vatican never needed to act with its own hands. It merely needed to allow for an unsigned letter, a coded gesture embedded within a liturgical chant, a rare absolution granted for an unorthodox act, and then an assassination. A subtle shift in territorial control, a secret forever buried. In the deepest vaults of the Vatican, in areas almost no one is ever permitted to enter, there exist drawers utterly devoid of labels. According to a 19th-century librarian who briefly worked in the archives, one such file bore the unsettling title, Duo Umbra. The Two Shadows. Its contents remain a profound mystery. Yet the name alone has sent chills down the spines of generations of scholars. Perhaps the Vatican always possessed an innate understanding. No power can endure for long without the fundamental ability to divide and control. Perhaps they meticulously fostered just enough animosity between the two factions, while simultaneously leaving clandestine pathways open for them to draw closer when circumstances demanded. Across blood-soaked centuries, only one force never relinquished its formidable grip on power: the Vatican. The Templars were incinerated, the assassins receded into the realm of myth. But the Vatican remains utterly unchanged. Never tarnished, never compelled to offer explanations, because they never directly participated in the game. They merely constructed the stage, allowing the pieces to wield their blades or extend their hands in seemingly independent acts. A silent economy. The exchange of knowledge and secrets. Traditional historians have consistently depicted the Templars and the Assassins as mortal adversaries, as fire and water sworn to mutual destruction. But deep within the ancient stone walls, where no light ever penetrated, a distinctly different truth has slowly, painstakingly emerged. They once engaged in a covert exchange with each other, not openly, not loudly, but with such meticulous precision that both sides acquired what they needed, and profoundly understood the immutable price of silence. According to an ancient Syriac manuscript discovered at the Mar Musa monastery in Syria, one passage recounts a monk's quiet, almost whispered confession. I saw a man in a white cloak with a red cross exchanged with another in a black turban carrying a curved blade. They did not greet each other with words, but with a map. A map. This was one of the initial items exchanged between the two factions, not to demarcate territory, but to gain a deeper comprehension of the landscape of their common adversaries, or to assiduously avoid unnecessary confrontation. The Assassins possessed an intricate web of informants meticulously embedded within markets, monasteries, and bustling harbors. The Templars, conversely, utilized pilgrims, merchants, and even priests as subtle cover for their extensive network of spies. Each side held knowledge that the other could never have accessed independently. Over time, the nature of their exchanges grew increasingly complex. A note from the Templar fortress at Croc des Chevaliers describes a smaller trebuchet, capable of launching projectiles significantly farther, based on a design obtained from a man with no emblem but the voice of the East. This design appeared in no European military texts of that era. Meanwhile, on the assassin side, evidence points to their employment of advanced light weapons, reinforced crossbows, slow-burning explosives, and spring-loaded blades. These were technologies largely unfamiliar to the Islamic world, yet they were not acquired through conventional warfare or established trade routes. This was not a friendship. It was a silent, unspoken pact between two shadows who profoundly understood each other's boundaries. A subtle nod in the dead of night, a wooden box surreptitiously left behind a collapsed wall, a wordless glance exchanged at a city gate. They had no need for explicit verbal communication. They simply understood. No one knows the frequency of these clandestine exchanges, but the indelible traces remain. Strange schematics unmatched by known medieval engineering. War tools that mysteriously appeared and vanished, operations once believed to be improvised, executed with almost supernatural precision. Modern scholars refer to this as the hidden current of Crusader knowledge, but a select few, those brave enough to delve deeper, believe it irrefutably proves something history has long striven to bury. The Templars and the Assassins did not merely clash. They once actively collaborated through something no war can ever produce, intellectual exchange. And that, perhaps, represented the Vatican's ultimate boundary. Because when two powers learn to seamlessly share knowledge, they no longer require a middleman. And at that pivotal juncture, the entire game irrevocably shifts. Jerusalem, 1190. The Scroll of Forbidden Truths. Deep within the Vatican's secret library, there exists a particular wooden shelf, unlabeled, unindexed, and accessible only to those of the very highest cardinal rank. Upon it, tucked away among forbidden scriptures, excommunicated texts, and ancient banned scrolls, rests a small roll of parchment, tightly bound with wax-infused red thread. Its sole identifier. Jerusalem, 1190. No one knows precisely how it arrived at the Vatican, who transported it, or why it has remained meticulously sealed for over 8 centuries. But what has long unsettled even the most senior clerics is not merely the potential content itself, but what is conspicuously stamped at the very top of the scroll. A vivid red Templar cross and a black circle intersected by a curved blade, the secret symbol of the Assassins. 2 emblems that, by all conventional understanding, should never coexist on a single document. And yet there they are, side by side, silent, patiently waiting. According to Silano Ventresca, the last known librarian to have physically touched the scroll in the year 1897, Its contents were succinct, yet every line was a dagger to the heart of what we call official history. The scroll, he asserted, meticulously described a secret meeting between representatives of the two orders, convened on the outskirts of Jerusalem at the zenith of a brutal military campaign. No clergy, no kings, no witnesses, only a forgotten underground stone chamber. Once, perhaps, a temple dedicated to Baal predating the age of Judaism, where two men solemnized their oaths by allowing their blood to drip onto a single piece of sheepskin parchment. The agreement did not pertain to territory or warfare. It centered on something far more dangerous: the control of information. Specifically, they consented to share a precise list of political and religious leaders who were manipulating the populace for their personal gain. They also agreed to share information regarding routes transporting weapons and gold between Europe and the Middle East, as well as archaeological secrets buried beneath Jerusalem's sacred sites. These were truths that, if exposed, possessed the power to shatter the very foundations of the world's great religions. And finally, there was a line that Ventresca claimed he could not bear to read a second time. It read, "From this day forward, he who breaks this balance shall not die by sword, but be erased by history itself." After Ventresca reported his findings to the Holy See, the scroll was permanently sealed and interred in the deepest vault of the secret library, a sacred place reserved for materials deemed a direct threat to the bedrock of global faith. From that moment onward, no one dared to speak of Jerusalem, 1190. All related documents were immediately confiscated. Scholars who had been involved were reassigned, and Ventresca himself vanished after what was described as a pilgrimage to southern Italy. He was never seen again. What is more terrifying than the scroll's mere existence is the Vatican's palpable fear of it. Because if the document is authentic, then everything we believe about those two legendary orders, about good and evil, light and shadow, may have been a meticulously staged performance, a play whose writer remains perpetually unseen. Only the consequences are real, and history, once again, succumbs to silence. The architecture of assassination. A hidden order. Medieval assassinations are often simplistically characterized as mere outcomes of religious animosity, power struggles, or endless cycles of vengeance. However, those who have meticulously studied the underlying patterns, how the victims were selected, precisely when they were eliminated, and who ultimately benefited from their demise, all arrive at the same chilling realization. This was not random violence. This was a meticulously executed order. The assassins were long feared for their uncanny ability to reach the seemingly unreachable. They struck down powerful leaders within sacred chambers, left daggers chillingly placed on kings' chests within their own fortresses, bringing down the untouchable in mere seconds. But what truly instilled terror in the powerful was not merely the blade. It was the unsettling question: who supplied them with the list? In an old Latin record concealed beneath the stone floor of an abandoned monastery in Provence, a brief but haunting line was discovered. "The man who will die tomorrow once denied land to the temple. His name was spoken between the stone walls. We did the rest." That account eerily aligns with the mysterious death of Duke Henry of Toulouse, a nobleman who had openly criticized the Templars for excessive taxation and brazenly accused them of concealing illicit treasures. He died during a hunting trip, struck by a single arrow from a direction where no hunters were positioned. 3 days later, his entire estate was quietly transferred to a small church under Templar financial control. That was not a coincidence. That was a meticulously executed settlement. In Aleppo, a famous case continues to resonate. A cleric renowned for vehemently denouncing all alliances with the West was murdered in the midst of a sermon. No killer was ever apprehended. But weeks later, a Templar supply depot was constructed near the border of assassin territory, facing no resistance, requiring no paperwork, no invoices. One death, one concession, one favor subtly returned. Modern scholars who have meticulously traced these seemingly isolated assassinations across 2 centuries have begun to discern a chilling pattern, a perfect political geometry. These were not acts of personal grudges, but strategic removals, designed to clear a path for a treaty, to bury a profound secret, or to silence a burgeoning threat before it could find a voice. Perhaps the Vatican never issued the direct command, but they undeniably knew. They assented through silence, and sometimes thin parchment stamped in Rome simply vanished en route. As if someone had surgically uprooted history itself with a small blade concealed within a sleeve. Not everyone was a target. Only those in the wrong place at the wrong time. Those who knew far too much. As for who carried out these silent executions, history remains hauntingly quiet, because the killers never reveal themselves. Only the results endure. Silent and irreversible. The Templars' silent bank, financing the unseen hand. When people conjure an image of the Templars, they typically envision ironclad knights beneath the banner of the cross, valiantly defending the Holy Land with courage and sacred oaths. But this represents only the visible surface. The hidden side, the aspect few ever dare to mention, was their unparalleled role as the most powerful underground bank in the medieval world. By the 12th century, the Templars had transcended their initial identity as merely a religious military order. They had evolved into a transnational financial empire, intricately linking Christian kingdoms, Middle Eastern territories, and diverse regions. Their financial influence extended even beyond the reach of the Pope's direct decrees. Through a sophisticated network of loans, safekeeping services, asset transfers, and managing international exchanges, they controlled the very commodity that both empires and churches craved most, the inexorable flow of money in the shadows. So, where did this immense wealth ultimately flow? Some of it undeniably found its way to the Vatican, that much is known. Another portion funded the construction of impregnable fortresses, extensive military campaigns, and the upkeep of vital pilgrimage routes. But there was one financial current never officially recorded in any ledger. A document, clandestinely leaked from a monastery in Lyon during the 17th century and swiftly confiscated by the Vatican, meticulously outlined a series of strange transactions between Templar financial hubs in Marseilles, Acre, and Antioch. These substantial withdrawals had no named recipients, only a cryptic label. Umbra Contractus, meaning the Shadow Pact. Curiously, these funds were always withdrawn just weeks before major political assassinations. A high-ranking archbishop who vehemently opposed the Crusades was poisoned. A nobleman obstructing gold shipments from the east was, accidentally, shot while hunting. A merchant who possessed an ancient map of Jerusalem vanished without a trace during a moonless night. No one ever apprehended the killers, but the money always leaves an irrefutable trail. And that trail consistently led back to the Templars. Many modern scholars now believe that the Templars did not themselves carry out these assassinations. They simply funded them, facilitated their execution, or discreetly cleared the logistical pathways. And in those very shadows, the assassins were the unseen hand that struck. What did they receive in return? Not gold, but invaluable safe passage, critical inside information, covert escorts through Templar checkpoints, and above all, the profound assurance of silence. An assassination cannot occur cleanly without someone meticulously handling the logistics. Who cleared the escape route? Who deliberately looked the other way at the city gate? Who secretly smuggled the blade across the border? That was the silent, indispensable work the Templars carried out, even as they devoutly prayed at dawn. This silent complicity was never codified into law, but it functioned with the chilling efficiency of a ghostly machine, perfect, silent, and unbreakable, because those who dared to break it were utterly erased from history, name, body, and bloodline. And that is how 2 supposedly opposing orders engineered a death bank, where blood was traded for gold, and death was financed by fervent prayer. The Vatican's chessboard, perpetual conflict for control. If the Templars represented the sword, and the assassins the hidden blade, then the Vatican was undeniably the chessboard upon which their fates were played. And on that board, the Church was never merely a piece. It was the entity that meticulously dictated the rules. There was no need for them to wield a sword, no need to sign an explicit order of execution. The Vatican commanded a power so immense that even emperors bowed before it. But to meticulously preserve that power, they employed a strategy common to every enduring empire throughout history. They perpetually kept the war alive. And to sustain a state of perpetual conflict, two crucial elements are indispensable: hatred and a meticulously maintained, fragile balance. Between the 12th and 14th centuries, there were numerous instances when the Templars grew excessively strong, or the assassins became unduly bold. But each time one side approached outright dominance, a sudden, inexplicable event would occur, invariably tipping the scales back towards a precarious deadlock. Never a total victory. Never a complete defeat. The Vatican, consummate masters of manipulation, flawlessly orchestrated the perfect triangle. When the Templars demanded autonomous control over eastern territories, the Church subtly rekindled old tensions with the assassins. When the assassins began to interfere with crucial trade routes tied to Catholic merchants, the Vatican, accidentally, leaked sensitive intelligence to Western knights. And when both sides paused, cautiously seeking common ground, a new threat would conveniently materialize, ingeniously pushing them back into a state of mutual suspicion and division. Division, meticulously cultivated like a sacred tree, never allowed to grow too tall, but never permitted to wither and die. In a leaked note from the Monte Cassino Abbey in the 18th century, one line chillingly reads, "Among those who bear arms, plant the belief that only the Church can keep peace. Once they believe, they will kill for us. And when they kill, we will need them longer." This revealed the true, insidious nature of the triangle. The Templars were reliant on the Vatican for legitimacy. The assassins needed the Vatican to avert total annihilation. And the Vatican, in turn, needed both to ensure that the currents of history never stagnated. When war erupted, the world's attention was fixated on the chaotic battlefield. But the Vatican had no need for battlefields. They merely needed to redraw a map, withdraw a blessing, or revoke a pardon, and a fragile accord would instantly collapse. One side would rage, the other would strike. Blood would inevitably spill once more, and the Church's authority would be reaffirmed yet again. The world, it seems, does not require actual peace to endure. It only needs to believe that peace is attainable, provided it heeds the entity that stands perpetually in between. And so, the Vatican, from within its ancient stone walls, became the undeniable, true epicenter of every blood-stained path. The scripted betrayal. When trust fractured. Every clandestine deal forged in the shadows carries the unmistakable scent of danger, the scent of oaths that no one can verify, of handshakes performed without witnesses, and of betrayal, meticulously scripted from the very beginning. When the Templars and the assassins first initiated their exchange of information, they genuinely believed they were masterfully controlling the game. When they shared invaluable maps, precious resources, and even advanced technology, they were convinced they were gaining the decisive upper hand. But they tragically overlooked one immutable truth: every hidden alliance endures only as long as it serves a greater, overarching power. And that ultimate power, unfailingly, was the Vatican. No one knows precisely when this silent, covert bond began to irrevocably fracture. Perhaps it was after an assassination that pushed the boundaries too far, or perhaps it was a shipment of gold that mysteriously never reached its intended destination. But the true fuse was ignited when both sides began to harbor the dangerous belief that they no longer needed the other. The Templars, with their sprawling financial network extending across all of Europe, began to entertain the audacious idea that they could even manipulate the Pope himself. The assassins, with their silent, pervasive reach deep into Islamic courts, started rejecting contracts emanating from the West and the Vatican. The Vatican, in response, simply watched and waited patiently. until the opportune moment arose to place the knife into the correct hands. King Philip IV of France, deeply mired in debt to the Templars, received a subtle, quiet suggestion from Rome that perhaps it was time to eliminate a group that had become far too powerful and dangerously lacking in piety. Simultaneously, in the east, assassin fortresses began to fall one by one, not to their sworn enemies, but to Muslim armies that had once received clandestine support from Vatican envoys. The Templars were brutally arrested, subjected to unspeakable torture, and ultimately burned at the stake. The assassins were systematically erased from the map, leaving behind nothing but elusive rumors. Neither faction foresaw their demise, because those who struck were not their declared enemies, but former allies who had once nodded silently in the dark. The Vatican never had to utter a single word. They simply withdrew their protection. No protest, no intervention, and the entire intricate structure collapsed like a paper tower when the wind is precisely summoned at the opportune moment. The cruelest irony is not that the Templars and assassins were destroyed. It is that they were annihilated by the very alliance that had once meticulously sustained their existence. When two underground forces mistakenly believed themselves to be the masters of the game, they tragically forgot the one eternal truth: the stage never belongs to the actors. It belongs, irrevocably, to the writer. And that writer was always seated behind the velvet curtain of the Vatican. And so, the game concluded. A chessboard left without a king. Without a clear victory, only charred pieces remaining, and one solitary figure still standing, untouched amidst the ashes. Mandates from the shadows. The Vatican's direct orders. In the deepest shadows of history, there exist documents thinner than air, yet possessing enough weight to make entire dynasties tremble when their contents are revealed. For centuries, people were led to believe that the Vatican merely observed from a distance as the Templars and the assassins clashed, observing, judging, blessing, or condemning as it saw fit. But leaked records from the most inaccessible archives of Europe unveil a profoundly different truth. The Vatican didn't just know, it issued the direct orders. One ancient Latin manuscript, unearthed in 1921 within an abandoned monastery in Austria, bore a single, ominous title: Mandatum ex umbra, a mandate from the shadows. On its initial page, a faint seal of Pope Innocent III was discernible, arguably the most powerful pope of the medieval era, renowned for launching the Fourth Crusade and personally intervening in numerous religious wars. The content of the manuscript never explicitly named the assassins or Templars. Instead, it referenced cryptic phrases such as, "those who hold blades in the night," "more loyal than bearers of the cross," and "those in white cloaks hiding ambition darker than coal." The chilling directive followed: use when needed, discard when no longer useful. But one particular line struck terror into the hearts of scholars. From the Holy See, let word be sent to Masyaf. The marked one must now find his final rest. Beneath it, 3 dots were arranged in an inverted triangle, a symbol employed exclusively within the Vatican's secret communications system during the 13th century to denote unspoken directives. In another document, held by the Benedictine order and subsequently seized by the Vatican after World War II, a note detailed a secret meeting. It involved 3 envoys from the island Holy See, a man believed to be a Grand Master of the Templars, and one unnamed figure from the East. This clandestine meeting took place on the island of Cyprus in 1212, precisely coinciding with a wave of assassinations and internal purges that swept across both Europe and the Middle East. This was no mere coincidence. Independent scholars have meticulously cross-referenced dates and events, discovering that every secret order dispatched from Rome was invariably followed by a mysterious disappearance. A British nobleman, on the cusp of publishing damning documents regarding Templar finances, suddenly dropped dead. A local leader who resisted assassin influence perished during a pilgrimage. A priest who dared to question the strange ties between both groups was exiled and subsequently vanished from all records. The Vatican has never acknowledged the existence of such mandates. But the scattered notes, the margin scribbles, and the scorched vellum seals, they stubbornly remain. Like embers that refuse to die, because truth does not require acceptance to be real. It only requires enough people to die for it, enough to fear it, and enough to labor tirelessly to bury it. And if the Pope indeed once issued such commands, then this world is no longer simply divided between good and evil, it is divided only between decrees and commands. Some preached from the sacred pulpit, while others whispered their directives behind cold stone walls. Project Vox Dei, the Vatican's secret surveillance network. People often envision spies as masked figures, cloaked in disguise, lurking perpetually in the shadows of society. But in the Vatican's intricate game, a spy dons a white robe, carries a Bible, and commences every sentence with the seemingly innocuous phrase, "May the Lord be with you." The uncomfortable truth is that many clergy in the medieval era were not merely zealous preachers of faith, but rather meticulously trained instruments of surveillance, infiltration, and manipulation, driven by an insatiable thirst for invisible power. The Vatican recognized early on that the most effective means to control the Templars and assassins was not through overt force, but from within, not with weapons, but with manufactured faith. With confessions subtly weaponized, and with ears that listened intently, yet never truly forgave. In a secret monastery near Avignon, according to a leaked document from the Carthusian order, there once existed a covert training program known as Project Vox Dei, the voice of God. But this voice was never intended for public ears. It was meticulously crafted to mimic holiness, to assiduously earn trust from deep within organizations the Vatican could not openly control. These operatives were meticulously taught to speak like devout monks, yet to think with the ruthless precision of assassins. They were trained to lead with unwavering faith, but to report every whispered secret, to befriend, and to kill when deemed necessary, leaving no trace. One of the most successful missions is subtly referenced in notes from the Monte Oliveto Maggiore Abbey. A priest named Brother Anselm was dispatched by the Vatican to a Templar stronghold in Sidon. He served as a preacher for 4 years. Then, a high-ranking Templar commander mysteriously died from consecrated wine poisoning, and Brother Anselm vanished from all records. Meanwhile, in the East, assassin fortresses occasionally welcomed Western scholars researching theology, a phrase frequently found in the Vatican's secret files. Some of these scholars never returned, but were never officially declared dead. They simply dissolved into the organization, living as one of them, while every night encoded messages traveled back through hidden relays embedded within monastic cells. No one knows how many such agents truly existed. But one thing is certain. Both the Templars and the assassins made critical decisions based on meticulously fed misinformation, strategic leaks, and careful manipulation. And with each calculated misstep, the Vatican steadily gained ground. Those dispatched by the Church required no tangible reward. They possessed no tombs, no relics, no medals, just a brief, chilling line in a restricted file. Embedded, active, effective. And so, the Vatican possessed eyes in every fortress, ears in every secret chamber, and a guiding hand in places even God no longer seemed to look. No one knew their true identities, because they never behaved like overt spies. They merely smiled gently, folded their hands in prayer, and quietly walked away, leaving behind a subtle, insidious change that no one noticed had already begun. Initiatio Silentiae, the baptism of silence. In the Catholic faith, baptism marks a sacred beginning, a cleansing ritual for the soul, welcoming an individual into the community of believers under the divine light of God. But there exist other rituals, never recorded in the Bible, never performed at the altar, and never witnessed by a congregation. They are carried out in cold, stone chambers, illuminated solely by candlelight, and whispered only by a name no one dares speak aloud. Initiatio Silentiae, the beginning of silence. According to notes pieced together from scorched fragments found in the Library of Alexandria, this ritual was never intended to save the soul. but rather to inextricably bind a person to a shadow network that seamlessly crossed all religious boundaries. Those chosen for this initiation did not belong to any single order. They could be knights, scholars, merchants, or even assassins. This baptism contained no cross, no holy water. Yet its structure uncannily mirrored the sacred ritual closely enough to deceive outsiders. And even for the initiate, it preserved just enough formality to appear legitimate if ever discovered. The participant was posed 3 profound questions. Do you renounce false light to face the true darkness? Will you pledge loyalty not to a man but to an unnamed mission? Will you remain silent even as your soul burns? If they consented, they placed a hand upon a small stone tablet. There was no crucifix, no curved dagger. Only a circle intricately carved with 3 pointed spokes, a symbol said to represent the triple forces, the Vatican, the Templars, and the assassins. There was no explicit oath, no recited prayer. Only silence. And that profound silence, in itself, constituted the sacred vow. Only one surviving copy of this account remains, handwritten by an exiled cardinal in the 17th century, meticulously describing how this ritual was employed to initiate those who were sufficiently clever, devoted enough, but could never publicly align with any single faction. They became eternal intermediaries, spectral figures who moved freely and unhindered between fortresses, monasteries, and hidden outposts, their names never appearing in recorded history. Some documents even hint that high-ranking leaders of both the Templars and the Assassins had once undergone this very ritual, which compellingly explains how the clandestine ties between the 2 factions endured for decades without detection. Naturally, the Vatican has never acknowledged its existence. But manuscripts describing these non-canonical baptisms have been meticulously sealed away by the Vatican Library under an edict titled Ad Perpetuum Silentium, for perpetual silence. And so, one of humanity's most sacred rites was twisted. Not to save souls, but to bind individuals into an alliance with no name, no banner, no country, and no God. Yet, this alliance wielded more power than any throne ever constructed. Once inducted, they were no longer merely knights, assassins, or priests. They transformed into something else entirely. Guardians of an invisible order, or perhaps, wholly sanctioned killers in disguise. The vanishing act. Erasing history. There is something strangely unsettling that has been quietly occurring for centuries. A vanishing act so subtle, so meticulously executed, that most people never even perceive it. Manuscripts referencing secret meetings, forbidden alliances, and unnamed pacts have steadily, systematically disappeared from libraries, monasteries, and archives across Europe and the Middle East. Not all at once, not with a clamor, but piece by painstaking piece, as if someone were methodically peeling away history's memory, 1 page at a time. At the Royal Library of Aragon, there once existed a map depicting hidden routes between Templar fortresses and assassin strongholds. Its markings were drawn in a script belonging to no known language. In 1754, when a group of scholars arrived to study it, they found only a blank sheet, though faint impressions of ink remained, as if painstakingly scrubbed with acid. When questioned, the librarian simply stated, "No one took it. It disappeared on its own." At the Islamic-era Library of Alexandria, ancient Persian documents detailing exchanges between the assassins and cross-bearing monks mysteriously perished in a midnight fire, despite the building being rigorously guarded around the clock. A monastery in Germany, once home to the Sidon collection, 17 12th-century manuscripts sealed by both Templar and Eastern monastic orders, was abruptly shut down in 1839 after a scholar vanished while researching the material. The Vatican cited structural renovations and sealed the archives. They have never reopened. So, the question is no longer why these documents are disappearing, but rather, who wields enough power to erase them everywhere, in precisely the same manner, with the same outcome, and without a single sound? We speak of fires that consumed Alexandria, wars that leveled Baghdad, pillagers who burned books in Constantinople. But few dare to confront a quieter, more insidious destruction, one that is deliberate, systematic, and chillingly precise. In a handwritten note concealed at the bottom of a chest in Florence, a 16th-century scholar wrote, "I once touched that document. The next day I was expelled from the academy. 3 days later my home was ransacked. 7 days later no one spoke my name again." He concluded with one trembling line. The manuscript did not burn itself. Someone would not allow it to exist. When memories are severed from the current of history, truth becomes indistinguishable from myth. And that is the ultimate form of power, not to control events, but to meticulously control what is remembered about them. The Vatican has never admitted to erasing a single document. Yet, it remains the world's greatest repository of historical materials, and simultaneously its strictest gatekeeper. Some refer to it as defending the faith. Others call it burning history without fire. And when history is forcibly stripped from the hands of mankind, truth becomes the one thing that no longer possesses the right to exist. Fiat Sindera, let them divide. No secret alliance endures eternally. Especially when trust is precariously built on silence and loyalty proves to be merely temporary. When whispers of a clandestine connection between the Templars and the assassins began to proliferate from the Holy Lands back into Europe, when younger leaders within both orders started to question, "Are we serving an ideal, or are we merely being used?" the quiet storm began brewing from within. Inside the formidable Templar fortresses of Acre and Tortosa, a wave of suspicion surged against those perceived as overly sympathetic to Eastern heresy. One commander, Sir Galin du Mort, was summarily executed behind closed doors for allegedly trading documents with a man outside the accepted faith. No evidence was presented. No public trial conducted, just a swift blade in the dark and a head that rolled before sunrise. Simultaneously, within the assassin fortress of Masyaf, 2 high-ranking members were poisoned after being accused of leaking corridor map routes to a stranger cloaked in a monk's robe. Western intelligence later confirmed that both individuals had undergone the secret rite of initiatio silentiae, the silent baptism intended to bind all 3 powers as one. It was as if someone had deliberately ignited both ends of a fuse, allowing the fire to consume them from within. Templars began purging those drawn to Eastern philosophies. Assassins relentlessly hunted down those suspected of trading loyalty for Europe's white gold. Everything pointed to an internal betrayal. But upon closer inspection, the orchestration became terrifyingly evident. A rare Vatican archive, meticulously copied in 1472 by a Dominican monk, bore a chilling title, Fiat Sindera. Let them divide. The document outlined a covert strategy, approved by one of the most secretive councils of cardinals in history. The plan was to plant false information inside both orders, leak it selectively to trigger internal reactions. When paranoia takes root, clean up what's left. Every subsequent step flawlessly mirrored the events that unfolded: the quiet civil war, the unexplained executions, the abrupt collapse of contact between hidden cells. No formal battle was required, just enough doubt meticulously sown in the dark. And the 2 forces that had once coexisted beneath the shadows would inevitably tear each other apart. The Templars were convinced the assassins had betrayed them. The assassins were certain the Templars had sold them out. Neither looked up to see the pale, gloved hand subtly pulling the strings from beneath the long white cloak. And the Vatican, one final time, was not caught in the middle. They were the orchestrator who brought it all to an end, without a sound, without an arrow, just a whisper, sharp enough to dismantle an empire, and cold enough to bury a legend. Hassan I-Sabbah's legacy, a question in the air. Every empire born in the shadows is ultimately built upon blood. But only one man in history ever inspired such profound fear, not through brute force, but through sheer, indomitable will: Hassan I-Sabbah. The legendary founder of the assassins, the man his enemies chillingly referred to as the Old Man of the Mountain. When he died in 1124, the assassins were far from being a global force. But the seed he had meticulously planted had already taken root, not in fertile soil, but deeply within the inherent fears of empires. They say he died in solitude, within the impenetrable fortress of Masyaf. No grand funeral, no public will, just a profound silence. But whispers persist of one final letter, not written for his devoted followers, but remarkably for the Templars. It sounds like a mere legend. However, in the early 20th century, a strange document was uncovered at the Santa Maria del Grazie monastery. It was a note, penned in Old Latin, said to be the account of a Templar envoy who journeyed to Masyaf in the summer the old man passed away. The note bore no official seal, only a singular title. The ultimus verbis. Of the final words, it read, "We are all men who hold knives for others, but when the blood dries, only those who hold memory win. If you wish to survive, trust not the one who stands between light and shadow, for he belongs to either. I leave behind no relics, only one question. What will you do when the one who writes history holds not a pen but a key?" Some scholars dismiss this as a mere forgery. But within the Annals Ultimi, the Templars' dark chronicle, there is a distinct mention of an unofficial journey to Masyaf, precisely dated to the year of Hassan's death. Why would the Templars undertake such a perilous journey? To negotiate? To threaten? Or to receive a final, cryptic message? One detail stands out. After Hassan's death, a small group of Templars abruptly withdrew from their operations in Tripoli and relocated north, where they constructed a fortified monastery that conspicuously never appeared on any official map. Inside that monastery, according to scattered records from the 1600s, there hung a stone plaque intricately carved with a single line. "We were warned." Warned of what? And why would they heed the words of a man the Vatican had long branded a heretic? Perhaps, even in a world steeped in blood and shadows, there exist truths so profound that both sides can perceive them. Truths that have nothing whatsoever to do with blades or banners, but everything to do with the one no one ever suspects. The one standing quietly at the back, whispering prayers while deftly pulling the strings. Hassan Sabbah is long dead, but the question he left behind still hangs heavy in the air. And perhaps that question was his true legacy, not written for the world to admire, but left for those who were once his bitter enemies, yet in the end were the only ones who truly understood him. Jacques de Molay's Legacy, the Testament of the Hidden Light. March 18, 1314. Beneath the Pont-Neuf bridge on the banks of the Seine, a man in a white robe stood bound to a wooden stake. The silent crowd watched as the flames began their relentless ascent. He was Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar, condemned by both the Pope and the King of France as a heretic. But as the fire licked at his knees, he did not scream. He did not beg. He did not weep. He simply turned towards Notre Dame Cathedral and, according to faint historical notes, uttered a strange, final sentence. "The truth lies beneath our feet. No fire can burn memory." For centuries, that sentence was interpreted as a mere metaphor. But in the early 20th century, when archaeologists unearthed a sealed basement beneath the old temple fortress in Paris, they made an unexpected discovery. It was a stone chamber, intricately etched with Templar symbols, and at its very center, a half-charred wooden box. Inside, a manuscript, its edges scorched but its words still hauntingly legible. The first page read, Testamentum de Luxa, the Testament of the Hidden Light. There was no author's name, but at the very end was a familiar mark, Jacques de Molay's personal seal, a horizontal sword beneath a shattered cross. And within that text he spoke not of gold, not of relics, but of one man. Hassan Sabbah. "I once heard the final words of the man the Church called a heretic," the text read. "But it was his words that woke me up. If he was right, then we, the Templars, have been pawns on a chessboard none of us can see." De Molay continued, And if the Vatican fears anything, it is this: that Templars and assassins might one day realize we were both being played by the one who holds the Bible and the keys. He then declared, "I leave behind a map showing the hidden points of contact between both sides. I leave a list of monks who no longer serve God. I leave evidence not for revenge, but so that someone someday might overturn the board. No one knows what ultimately became of that map or that list. Some say the Vatican seized it immediately. Others believe that those who discovered it simply vanished, just like so many ancient scrolls that mysteriously disappeared from history. From Paris to Rome, Jerusalem to Masyaf, de Molay's legacy endures. Not in the curse he may have uttered as he died, but in what he left behind, where there were no priests, no popes, only stone, dust, and a truth sealed shut. They burned him alive, but they could not incinerate memory. Because some fires do not merely destroy flesh, they ignite a light that darkness never wishes to see. Archivum Crypticum. The Forbidden Archive. There was no alliance, no pact, no official record proving that the Vatican ever maintained ties to heretical groups. That has been the unwavering official stance for centuries. From medieval popes to modern-day press secretaries, the Vatican has stood behind a wall as solid as stone, the guardian of faith, the beacon of light in a chaotic world. Untouched by those who use bloodshed to spread their message. But truth does not require speech to exist. Paper cannot all be burned, and stone never lies. In 1991, a leak from within the Vatican's archives revealed the existence of a hidden vault known as the Archivum Crypticum, the Forbidden Archive. Not listed in any public catalog, off-limits to the faithful. Off-limits even to esteemed scholars, only a mere handful of senior cardinals were ever granted access. And inside they discovered what the Church had never, and perhaps would never, openly admit. Among its contents was a hand-drawn animal skin map, meticulously detailing the movements of envoys from Rome to Masyaf, passing through Acre and Tripoli. It was sealed with red wax bearing the double-key sigil, the emblem of papal authority. There was also a document, written in a strange blend of Arabic and Latin, meticulously detailing a three-party negotiation between Vatican emissaries, assassin leaders, and a high-ranking Templar commander. Scrawled in the margin was the chilling directive: balance must be preserved. No side may be allowed total victory. And most startlingly, a modified Bible. Its handwritten appendix, inked in red, read, "And the Lord said, let the hands that wield swords watch each other in fear. The third shall rule by prayer." These records were never made public, because those who attempted to do so met with strange accidents. Sudden resignations, or simply vanished without a trace. One Jesuit priest clandestinely photographed 2 pages and mailed them to an independent archive in Prague. 6 months later, he was declared voluntarily relocated to a remote monastery, with no forwarding address provided. These secrets persist not because no one knows them, but because too many are paralyzed by fear to confirm them. Because if the Vatican once stood between the Templars and the assassins, not as a benevolent peacekeeper, but as the meticulous director of the entire macabre play, then every relic loses its sanctity. Every ritual becomes mere theater, and every prayer just an empty echo in history's grandest, most deceptive performance. Outwardly, the Vatican steadfastly denies it all. But in the deepest layers of its soil, where the ancient stone still bears markings that no chisel dares to erase, the truth remains, silent, stubborn, defiantly refusing to be forgotten. Denda memorialia, erase the memory. Not all wars commence over overt disputes. Some are meticulously waged to bury memory itself. In the early 14th century, after decades of profound silence, Pope Clement V suddenly issued the papal bull Pastoralis Preeminentia, ordering the arrest of all Templar members across Europe. Around the same time, Eastern scholars began to observe a strikingly similar purge. Assassins in Alamat, Syria, and Persia were being hunted down with ruthless efficiency, not only by local dynasties but also by armed groups led by pilgrimage priests from the Christian West. Why would the Vatican seek to utterly destroy the very forces it had once secretly allied with? The answer may reside in just two chilling words: clean up. Independent historians have consistently observed that the timing of these events was no mere coincidence. In 1305, a closed council was convened in Avignon. Attended by 3 members from orders with direct access to the Archivum Crypticum, the Vatican's forbidden archive. 3 years later, coordinated heresy purges erupted. But they did not strike at cathedrals or established cults. They precisely targeted the strongholds that had once served as the crucial nexus between the Templars and the Assassins. Classified Vatican documents include a chilling directive, Denda Memorialia. Erase the memory. It appeared as a red seal on internal orders meticulously detailing the destruction of fortresses, the systematic burning of documents, and the silent elimination of witnesses. Not for heresy, but for the unforgivable crime of knowing too much. One faded record from a Franciscan monk in France reads, "I saw a list of 112 sites marked for erasure. Not places of worship, but vaults where forbidden meetings once left their trace. Among them, the assassin fortress of Masyaf, the Temple Monastery in Paris, the chapel of Santa Lucia in Bologna, and even a crypt beneath St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. What were they so desperately hiding? Documents, treaties, or fragments of an alliance never inscribed into any holy scripture. After the purges, the Vatican declared a simple, definitive truth. There are no more Templars. The Assassins, an Eastern myth. History needs order, not confusion. But it is precisely that surgical cleanliness that chills the soul. Because no crime vanishes that perfectly unless the one erasing it is simultaneously the one rewriting it. No more maps, no more pacts, no more letters exchanged between leaders. Only torn, burned, or encrypted fragments remain, beyond recognition. The Vatican denied all involvement. But its actions resembled not the panicked flight of a fugitive, but the chilling precision of someone systematically burning a forest, not to escape, but to meticulously erase their own footprints. When the 2 hands that once held the blade were severed, the one who gave the orders needed no sword at all, only silence. The keeper of memory, a survivor's legacy. Amidst the sea of blood, the desolate ruins, and the deadly silence left behind by the purges, the world universally believed that no one had survived. No more Templars, no more assassins, no one left to speak of what truly transpired. But a strange record, unearthed in an old library on the island of Malta, penned by an anonymous 15th-century monk, opened a narrow crack in the perfect darkness the Vatican had so meticulously constructed. "I saw him board a ship on a moonless night," the monk wrote. "He brought no family, no treasure. Only 2 things, a scroll wrapped tightly in linen, and a chest strap carved with 2 overlapping emblems, the Templar cross and the crescent blade of the Assassins." Who was he? His real name was never recorded, only the whispered nickname the island's fishermen used when they glimpsed his silhouette at dawn, standing atop the cliffs. The keeper of memory. According to the account, he lived in profound isolation on a high hill, speaking to no one except a small orphan girl he raised as his own. And then, one day, they were simply gone. Their hut was discovered empty, save for a scrap of cloth pinned to the wall with a rusted blade, bearing a single line faintly written in charcoal. The 2 worlds were never at war, only forced to believe they had to kill each other. Modern researchers believe he may have been one of the few remaining triangular liaisons, individuals once secretly trained by the Vatican to maintain covert communication between the Church, the Templars, and the Assassins. When the elaborate network collapsed, he chose not to fight, but to vanish, carrying with him the final, damning proof. Rumor has it that his small boat reached the North African coast, where an ancient Islamic monastery, once a hidden supply post for the Assassins, welcomed him. A 17th-century Moroccan scholar wrote in his journal, "An old man came to us wearing both emblems on his chest. He did not ask to be remembered in history. He asked for one thing only. Let someone someday read what was burned. No one knows how much longer he lived, or where the scroll ultimately ended up. Only this, from the 16th century onward, a strange dual symbol began appearing on monastery walls, in woodcut prints, even subtly etched into the bottom of communion cups in quiet Italian villages. Two symbols no longer in opposition, but seamlessly joined as one. Not to claim power, but to remind the world that truth once had a chance to exist before it lost the last soul willing to speak it. The Vatican may have meticulously wiped almost everything, but as long as one person survived, carrying that memory across the sea, history, though buried, was not yet dead. And for those who come after, if they are wise enough to truly see, they will understand that the pervasive silence we inhabit today is merely the residual dust of a game we were never permitted to witness in its entirety. The Black Iron Door. A library for forbidden memories. In 1936, as Europe trembled beneath rising political undercurrents and shifting axes of power, a group of Jesuit scholars from the Vatican was granted unprecedented access to parts of the underground archive system, areas that had for too long remained utterly untouched. The investigation was intended to be routine, a mere reorganization of disordered medieval manuscripts displaced by centuries of wars. But after 3 days of continuous surveying, the team reported a startling discovery: a marble corridor sealed by a black iron door. No handle, no hinges, and no record of its existence in any architectural schematics. Above the door, a single symbol was etched, deep and cold, a plus sign. The symbol itself appeared in no known theological texts, yet the scholars immediately recognized its constituent components. The mark of hidden knowledge, plus the cross of the Templars, and the crescent blade of the assassins. No one knew why the door existed, who had constructed it, or why it was sealed with black iron, a material not found in any of the Vatican's documented construction materials. What was unequivocally certain was this: there was no keyhole, and no one knew how to open it. The head of the investigation, Father Domenico Felli, later recorded in a personal journal, a document that would only surface after his death in 1972. I heard a sound echoing from behind that door. Not voices, not machines, but like hundreds of pages shivering all at once, as if something or someone was reading. As if the room itself was remembering. The Vatican abruptly halted the investigation. All members of the team were immediately reassigned to isolated monasteries. Their research was sealed and marked with a single classification, Classificato Nigrum, absolute confidentiality. In 1941, during the chaos of World War II, as bombs neared Italy's borders, many priceless documents were evacuated from the archives. But that room, the Black Iron Chamber, was never mentioned. It was as if it had never existed, as if the memory of it had been forcibly erased. And yet, a single, blurred photograph remains, clandestinely taken by one of the scholars. It shows the door itself, with a beam of light striking the stone just right, revealing a faint inscription near the floor. A library for what no one is allowed to remember. No one ever returned. No questions were permitted. And even now, when queried, the Vatican offers the same unchanging answer. There is no such door in the main archives. But some doors do not exist on maps because they do not lead to physical places. They lead to memories that even God has chosen to forget. Samir, the one who remembered. People often believe the assassins are utterly extinct. That what remains is nothing more than an Eastern legend, vague, romanticized echoes of a forgotten past. But in 1974, a personal journal was discovered inside an old chest at the Santa Maria di Monticelli monastery in Italy. Within it lay a story never made public, the private account of Cardinal Benedetto Grimaldi, former prefect of the Vatican Library. The journal had no title, no page numbers, only dated entries, written in firm but faintly trembling handwriting, and one line underlined in red. Night of June 11th, 1947, I met someone who does not belong to this era. According to the Cardinal, he was led through 3 sealed doors deep within the Vatican's underground archives to a room known only as Stanza dell'Oblio, the room of forgetting. There, he did not encounter a diplomat or a Muslim scholar, but a man, lean, middle-aged, with long hair tied behind his neck, speaking in ancient Arabic laced with Latin. On his left hand was a faded tattoo, a curved dagger across a crescent moon. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not wish to negotiate. He came only to state that he remembered. The man introduced himself with a single name, Samir. No title, no family name. But according to Cardinal Benedetto, his eyes strikingly resembled those in ancient sketches of Hassan I Sabbah, deep, calm, and sorrowful. Like someone who carried the weight of centuries of blood and betrayal. Samir never claimed to be a leader. He made no vow of vengeance. He simply left behind one item. A piece of old leather etched with 2 overlapping inscriptions. One in Latin, Memorialis Fidelis Servus Dei, a faithful servant of God's memory. The other in ancient Persian. Death is not as terrifying as being forgotten. Cardinal Benedetto, a devout skeptic, wrote in his entry, I once believed history was made of bones and ashes. But that night I saw that history has eyes, a voice, and wounds that never fully heal. He concluded, I don't know what the Vatican did to his order. I only know he didn't come to threaten. He came to warn. The journal abruptly ends just months later. No further entries. Strangely, the Cardinal resigned without explanation and lived in seclusion until his death in 1976. The chest containing his journal was locked behind 3 seals, only reopened decades later during a routine archive cleaning. The Vatican has never issued a statement. But the last line in the journal is what chills most readers. I once believed I was a guardian of faith, but perhaps I was merely chosen to forget. Samir never returned. No one knows where he went. But after that encounter, a series of ancient maps and documents once meticulously sealed by the Vatican began mysteriously disappearing. Perhaps someone is painstakingly piecing together what was buried. Perhaps memory, once awakened, never truly sleeps again. La Nativita Segreta. Truth hidden in art. Amidst the countless sacred works of art housed in Europe's venerable churches, one painting appears deceptively simple, La Nativita Segreta. The Secret Nativity. Painted in the late 15th century, it was long attributed to an anonymous artist from the Florentine school. For decades, it rested quietly in a small chapel tucked away in the mountains of Arezzo, Italy, unnoticed, unexhibited, and largely forgotten. Until 1981, when a restoration expert uncovered something astonishing beneath the surface paint, hidden in the bottom right corner of the canvas. 2 tiny, interlocking symbols. A bright red Templar cross, and the curved crescent blade of the assassins, so minuscule they could only be seen with a magnifying glass. And that is where the questions irrevocably began. The color palette, the masterful use of light, the anatomical precision of Mary's hand, they all uncannily matched the distinctive technique of one man, Michelangelo. There is no official proof that he painted it. But a torn manuscript found in the Medici Library archives includes a handwritten note attributed to Michelangelo himself. Death is not the end. History does not live in stories. It lives in the hands of those who know how to hide it. But this was not merely a nativity scene. La Nativita Segreta did not simply depict the Virgin Mary and the Christ child. In the background, beyond the stable, where light could not reach, stood 2 hooded figures, cloaked and silent, facing each other, each holding a distinct object. Under infrared light, the scene truly revealed itself. One figure clutched a cross sheathed like a sword. The other held a tightly rolled scroll. There were no angels, no shepherds, just a child being shielded by both figures, as if protecting something far greater than the child himself. A French art scholar, after years of meticulous study, wrote, Michelangelo didn't need to paint the truth. He only had to place it where no one would think to look and leave it there for the eyes that could see. Mainstream historians summarily dismissed it all. They labeled it a symbolic coincidence, or a post-period embellishment. But the profound question no one dares to answer remains: if Michelangelo truly knew, who told him? And why would he choose a nativity scene, the most sacred symbol of faith, to conceal such a subversive truth? Some believe Michelangelo once saw a copy of the leather scroll left behind by Jacques de Molay. Others claim he met a man in grey robes in Rome in 1496, just months before he began sculpting La Pietà. Perhaps he didn't take sides. Perhaps he was simply someone who understood one fundamental thing. Art is the only sanctuary where truth can survive without being burned. Today, the painting has been removed, its location undisclosed. The Vatican claims it was for preservation. But in the few surviving reproductions, the two symbols remain, small, silent, like shadows that never abandon the child they swore to protect. And perhaps Michelangelo didn't paint solely to honor God, but to whisper a warning to the future. Truth does not disappear. It only finds a new place to hide. Dr. Elias Mertens and the Prague Revelation. The modern world prides itself on having moved beyond myth. We place our unwavering belief in data, in irrefutable evidence, in the scientific method. But sometimes, all it takes is one ancient manuscript and one relentlessly curious mind to make history tremble once more. In 1998, at a history symposium in Marrakech, Morocco, a young Belgian researcher named Dr. Elias Mertens left the entire audience in stunned silence with a single, audacious declaration. I have found proof that the Templars and the Assassins not only once collaborated, but signed a formal pact sealed with the personal insignia of Pope Urban II. He did not bring the original document. Only 3 scanned images were displayed. One depicted a seal fusing the Templar Red Cross and the Assassin's crescent blade. Another was a handwritten page in Latin and ancient Persian. And the last, a sea route map from Acre to Alamat, passing through 3 secret supply points. One of them was ominously marked Via Sancta, the hidden holy road. Within 24 hours of his presentation, Elias Mertens vanished. There were no signs of struggle at his hotel. His passport, wallet, and belongings were left untouched in the room. Only his laptop and the USB drive containing the scans were gone and never recovered. Moroccan police launched an investigation, but it yielded no results. The Belgian government quietly requested diplomatic access, but no new information was ever released. His family received a single handwritten note, no signature, no postmark, just one chilling line: silence is the only way memory lives long. In the years that followed, several academic journals attempted to verify the documents Elias had referenced. None succeeded. Only one shaky video, captured by a student on an old handheld camcorder, survived. In it, Elias can be heard clearly stating, "I don't believe they were ever true enemies. I believe they were made to appear as enemies but chose to hold hands in the shadows because they both understood one truth. The real enemy always sits behind the throne." And then he disappeared, as if he had never existed. Theories emerged. Was he silenced by extremist groups? Eliminated by a force protecting Vatican secrets? Or did he step through a door he knew he could never return from? A year later, a strange graffiti appeared behind the stone wall of the ancient library of Alexandria, Egypt. It depicted 2 hands, one armored like a Templar's, one wrapped in leather like an assassin's, exchanging a scroll. Beneath it, a French inscription: "Those who once spoke now sleep beneath the waves." No one claimed responsibility. No one dared to erase it. And in subsequent history conferences, the Templar assassin connection was never brought up again. Not because scholars no longer believed, but because they had learned that some truths, once seen, are never meant to be looked at twice. Elias Mertens no longer appears in academic directories. His Wikipedia page was deleted in 2006, with no explanation given. And all that remains is a single handwritten note from his closest friend, tucked inside an old leather notebook. Elias believed that history never dies. It only changes its name and waits for someone else to tell it. The unfinished game. Echoes in modern secret societies. More than 8 centuries have elapsed since the Templar knights were brutally burned at the stake. And since the last assassins vanished into the nameless mountains of Persia. We presumed they were gone. We believed history had definitively closed its pages. But every sealed scroll, every symbol hidden within a painting, every final note left by a vanished scholar, serves as a poignant reminder of one undeniable truth: to die is not to disappear. It is simply to retreat into the shadows, to survive by another means. And if it is indeed true that the Templars and assassins, once cast as eternal enemies, were in fact one and the same, if they once divided the world like 2 hands gripping the same sword, if the Vatican was not the judge, but the orchestrator, then the question is no longer who won or lost. The real question is, who meticulously rewrote all of history? And why are all of us, from esteemed scholars to ordinary people, still reading a version that has been edited far too many times to be truly trustworthy? What remains now is not evidence, but a profound absence. Absence in the archives. Absence in the cold stone walls of ancient churches. Absence even in humanity's collective memory. And when we examine today's secret societies, the Freemasons, Skull and Bones, the Illuminati, we encounter new names. But the rituals feel strangely familiar. The symbols are merely evolved versions of the ancient ones: the black robes, the windowless rooms, the oaths never to be spoken aloud. Perhaps the Templars and assassins no longer exist by those specific names, but their underlying will, their hidden structure, and the archive even the Vatican once feared, still circulate discreetly within centers of power that no one elects and no one truly controls. And perhaps these modern secret societies are not mere successors by chance, but an integral part of a plan meticulously written long ago. When Jacques de Molay and the heirs of Hassan-I Sabat passed the final scroll between them, maybe they were never truly enemies. Maybe they were simply playing roles, one the righteous knight, the other the invisible blade. And together, they carved the same enigmatic symbol into a basement that no light could ever reach. Because the greatest truth is not about who is right or who is wrong. The greatest truth is that we were never meant to know the truth. And those who carried that memory learned to conceal it where no one would ever think to look. And when secret societies began to overtly appear in the 17th and 18th centuries, under the guise of freedom, of science, of new belief systems, we are compelled to ask one unsettling question: where did they truly originate? Why do their symbols so perfectly align with those of the Templars and Assassins, 2 forces we were explicitly told had vanished centuries ago? Could this not be a simple continuation, but a deliberate return? A system that once manipulated history from the shadows, now meticulously preparing to do so again, with new names, new faces, but the exact same design. The journey of the Templars, the Assassins, and the Vatican may culminate here. But another door is slowly opening, a world where light cannot penetrate. And nameless hands once again shape the inexorable fate of tomorrow. Are you ready to delve deeper into the world of secret societies? If what you have just heard feels like merely the tip of the historical iceberg, know that beneath the surface lies far more that has never been revealed. Leave a comment below. Which secret society do you wish to explore in the next episode? The Freemasons, the Illuminati, Skull and Bones, or perhaps a name far less known, but far more terrifying in its power? Because sometimes, what you most desire to know is precisely what history was meticulously designed to conceal.